Welcome to Newshour. Britain's long-running debate over immigration has reached a new crescendo. Addressing the nation on Monday, Prime Minister Keir Starmer warned that the UK risks becoming an island of strangers if net migration doesn't fall. Well, the phrase sparked immediate backlash, not only from political opponents, but also from within the Labour ranks, reviving uncomfortable echoes of Enoch Powell's 1968 Rivers of Blood speech. Well, Downing Street insists the comparison is misplaced. Starmer, they say, is balancing realism with compassion, acknowledging migrants' contributions while pushing for tighter controls. Critics disagree, though, questioning whether a Labour government can get tough on immigration without alienating its progressive base. Well, tonight we ask, what does Starmer's tone tell us about the political direction of Labour? What policies are being proposed and will they work? Is the real issue, though, about numbers or about integration, housing, wages and services? And for those who say immigration isn't the problem, we ask plainly, how much is too much? Two guests, two perspectives, one fundamental question for Britain's future. Let's take a look at what the PM actually said.
Today we publish a white paper on immigration, a strategy absolutely central to my plan for change that will finally take back control of our borders and close the book on a squalid chapter for our politics, our economy and our country. Now, in a diverse nation like ours, and I celebrate that, these rules become even more important. Without them, we risk becoming an island of strangers. So as this white paper sets out, every area of the immigration system, work, family and study, will be tightened up so we have more control. Skill requirements raised to degree level. English language requirements across all routes, including for dependents. The time it takes to acquire settled status extended from 5 years to 10. So perhaps the biggest shift in this white paper is that we will finally honour what take back control meant and begin to choose who comes here so that migration works for our national interest. You know, this is where the whole debate is skewed, as if some people think controlling immigration is reining in a sort of natural freedom, rather than the basic and reasonable responsibility of government to make choices that work for a nation's economy. And for years, this seems to have muddled our thinking. But let me be clear, it ends now. We will create a migration system that is controlled, selective and fair. A clean break with the past that links access to visas directly to investment in homegrown skills, so that if a business wants to bring people in from abroad, they must first invest in Britain, but also so settlement becomes a privilege that is earned, not a right. Easier if you make a contribution, if you work, pay in and help rebuild our country.
OK, let's head over to the UK now and get the latest from our correspondent there on the ground, Ollie Barrett.
Well, Guy, this was a major political intervention from the Prime Minister Keir Starmer. It was heavily trailed ahead of the Monday speech. The Monday press conference took place at 8:30 a.m. local time, with journalists called to Downing Street for it at quite an unusual time for a press conference, but the government clearly wanted to capture as much of the early week's news agenda as possible, and indeed through Tuesday and Wednesday it was the top item really on the domestic news here in the UK, and the government will have been cheered by that, despite some of the controversy. Keir Starmer setting out a raft of changes that he says will bring down net migration substantially or significantly, in the other word that is being used by Keir Starmer and his Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, for the impact they say these changes will make. They are not, though, putting a specific target on it in terms of numbers, how much they would like to see those net migration numbers reduce overall. And bear in mind, over the last 12-month period we have for that kind of data, we're looking at a number over 700,000 on an annual basis for net migration to the UK. But changes such as tougher requirements for English language, foreign nationals having to stay in the UK longer for 10 years rather than 5 before they receive their so-called settled status, changes to visa routes in different sectors of the economy, other changes as well that Keir Starmer says will bring down net migration in a substantial way. It was the language, though, as well, of his press conference that got a lot of attention to, and also brought with it a lot of criticism, particularly the idea that Keir Starmer said the UK risks becoming an island of strangers. That led to some critics from within his own Labour Party saying that he had gone too far, that he was using divisive language, and that he should even apologise, some of them were saying. Well, the government has rejected the calls for an apology and says that Keir Starmer stands by his language, and other cabinet ministers have rowed in behind it as well, saying that the British public does believe that migration and immigration to the UK needs to change. Criticism also from the other side of the political spectrum in a rather different way. Reform UK, for example, led by Nigel Farage. They say that the Labour Party is now sounding rather like Reform when it talks about immigration, but they also say that the changes the government has been suggesting won't have the impact that they say is needed. The Conservative Party as well insists that these are not changes that go far enough, that will have enough of an impact and bring down net migration in enough of the direction that they would like to see it cut. Labour would hit back against the Conservatives and say, look, migration has been peaking during the period in which the Conservatives were in office, and Labour say that it is a problem they were handed by the Conservatives that they are now moving to address. Despite all of the criticism for Keir Starmer, and some of it, as I say, coming from within his own party, I think the government will be cheered by polling since the speech by Keir Starmer, which suggests that broadly the electorate agrees with many of the things that he was saying and many of the changes that he says need to be made. Keir Starmer is acutely aware that polling for some time has showed that the electorate does want overall immigration numbers to come down. He's also therefore acutely aware that heading into the next general election in a few years' time from now, if overall net migration numbers haven't started to fall in a major way, that's going to be politically very difficult for him indeed, as he tries to retain his majority in the House of Commons. The other thing to say about timing is that this speech, this press conference, came days after Reform UK had made significant gains in local elections up and down parts of England. Keir Starmer insisting that this announcement, these policy changes, don't flow from those local election results, but you have to view it through the prism of Labour being aware that Reform is starting to take votes from it in actual electoral events. And with a view on that next general election, several years away now, but with a view on that next general election, Keir Starmer knows that the British public want him to deliver lower migration numbers overall ahead of that poll, or it's going to be a very difficult poll indeed for him and for the Labour Party heading into that next general election. So the government standing by the words and the policy changes that it set out on Monday, despite some pretty sharp criticism from different quarters. Ollie Barrett in London for A News.
Okay, thank you, Ollie. Now for some deeper analysis, I'm first joined by Philip Churm, UK-based political analyst. Phil, great to see you as always. What was Keir Starmer hoping to achieve then, do you think, with this speech?
I think, as Ollie said, it was to some extent on the back of the Reform successes just a couple of weeks ago in the local elections, where they won a huge amount of council seats and also won a by-election, to be able to show that people are turning from both the Conservatives and Labour and backing reform. They wanted some kind of change there. So he was in some way trying to combat that. Now, Keir Starmer has already spoken in the past about immigration, and critics have been saying that he hasn't done enough. Immigration is without a doubt one of the biggest polarising issues in modern times, and if you win support on that, you do reassure the critics, and you certainly, to some extent, pacify the people on the right who've shifted in that direction because they are trying to turn away from you. The Labour Party, traditionally left of centre party, traditionally done very well in working class areas. But as we move into an area where a lot of political analysts are saying, look, you know, voting behaviour is now shifting away from social class and now moving into other issues, then it's important for the Prime Minister to be able to try and make this sort of speech which is going to be able to pull back some of the voters that might want to vote for him.
And just on that, Phil, you know, it's a very difficult position for a Labour Prime Minister with a situation where arguably the most popular party of the moment, the party on the rise, is to the right of the Conservative Party, you know, a right-wing party. With that in mind, though, do you think the island of strangers element of the speech was a step too far?
I think it's worth mentioning the context in which it was said. It was done in a section of his speech which was talking about fairness, and in that same phrase he celebrated diversity, but then went on to say, look, we need rules, and without these rules we end up as an island of strangers. It's a very specific phrase, though. It feels like it wasn't in any way accidental, and undoubtedly people who will have advised him on that speech, maybe helped write it with him, will have known that one of the best known and most polarising speeches in the last 60 years in the UK contained that very phrase, island of strangers. So it's a very specific phrase and probably not accidental in any way. It suggests there are issues with cultural differences, and that's an area that panders often to the far right. But it's also slightly misplaced because, he would have known it would have provoked debate. And the argument is, does he know that would have then gone across more newspapers, given more airtime, and therefore raised the issue as a whole, and therefore that's why he used that phrase? Or was it just simply that it was genuinely what he felt, that somehow there was this section of the diverse population within the UK who are becoming strangers?
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? We've moved to a world now where politicians, speechwriters, will often place things within speeches that they know will cause a stir on social media. The politician then says nothing about it, and the hope is that fervour that's created somehow reaches people that the politician wants to reach.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And we live in a social media environment. As mentioned earlier, the whole issue of race, of immigration, whether it's legal or illegal immigration, is the most polarising debate. I say in the UK, but across Europe and most of the Western world. It's one of the biggest issues. And therefore, to be able to take a stance which is going to hit social media and the tabloid press and the quality press all at once is probably not accidental.
Phil, just going back to Keir Starmer and the Labour Party's dilemma, how then does a centre-left party get tough on immigration and still remain trusted by its core supporters?
It's often seen as a difficult one, but it's not a new thing for centre-left parties within the UK, in fact, in most countries, to to take hard lines on immigration and still maintain that trust. I mean, if we go back to the same time as Enoch Powell's speech, 1968, it was around the time of the introduction of the Commonwealth Immigrants Act, and that was one of the things that Enoch Powell was speaking against. So Harold Wilson, the Prime Minister at the time, the Labour Prime Minister at the time, he wanted to be able to limit free movement. Tony Blair, in 2008, he introduced the points-based system for non-EU migration, migration integration linked immigration policies. So it was. So it's not unusual to do. However, it's been done slightly different. It's been seen as being more controversial in the UK because those issues of race and politics have and the left and right have been inextricably linked. Now, if we look in other countries, if we look at parts of Scandinavia, for example, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, they have very strong integration requirements. They have quite hard immigration policies linked to things like how good people are at speaking the local language, whether they're able to take part in employment, and so on. And in Denmark, for example, they tend to see that not as anti-immigrant, but as being pro-welfare, protecting the welfare state, and pro-integration, which then resonates with working-class voters. So it's a different approach, but it is the left of centre parties still taking a hard line on immigration.
Very interesting indeed. Phil, thank you very much indeed for joining us from the UK. OK, let's cross live now to Istanbul and speak to the political commentator, Professor Tim Wilson. Professor, always good to see you on Newshour. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's look at this then. The government white paper, it does outline policy, but no targets, no headline number. I've got some of the latest ONS figures here on migration relative to population. The UK, 3 times the level of France, double that of Germany, double that of the United States, more than double that of Italy. In fact, you have to look to Canada and Australia to find higher migration levels. And of course, both of those countries are over 30 times bigger than the UK. So my question is simply, how much is too much?
Well, I think you're probably looking at it from the wrong end. I think actually, if you look at the other way, we don't have enough immigration for Britain because we have a rising elderly population. We have a lot of pensions to provide, and we don't have the working age people, the indigenous working age people, to pay the tax to support all that pension funding. So we actually need more immigrants in Britain than we've even got. And so limiting them is shooting ourselves in the foot, effectively. And going for particularly the targets that Starmer has gone for seems extraordinary. To go for the care industry, which is already suffering, it's struggling, and to attack that. Now, I think there's a statistic that apparently 40% of nurses are now planning to leave the UK. The people are talking about this policy being inhumane, about it being hostile, but the reality is this isn't the way to reduce numbers of migrants. I think it's only going to reduce about 100,000 at the very most, even if it's successful. It's not only the care sector, but also students. Why attack students again? Because they're easy. The care sector is very well regulated, very well documented, as are students. So these are easy hits for the Home Office, which has proven to be so unbelievably lazy anyway when it comes to immigration. This is a window dressing rather than real reform.
Yeah, it's very interesting that actually when you look at the data, the largest group typically going back through the years is students. You know, people who come here to learn, to improve their skills, and then obviously to go back to other countries. It is a challenge though, isn't it? That on the one hand, you can say that the debate about limiting numbers, the debate about seeing migration as negative is unhealthy, unpalatable, not something that brings out the best in the British public. But also, numbers have been higher than other countries, and there are some, I guess, valid concerns about a relatively small triangular-shaped island in the North Sea taking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people every year. How then do we have this conversation, this debate? Or is it a case that to discuss any level, any target at all, is seen as something that we mustn't do?
I think we have to ask how many people we need in order to pay our bills, let's say in 20 years' time. That's the first question. You have to look at it economically. And looking at it in this social approach, whipped up by Farage and Reform UK, approaches it from the wrong end. Now, Phil quite rightly said that the Labour Party have dealt with this before. In fact, it was Blunkett who really introduced the machinery of the hostile environment, which was then made significantly worse by Theresa May. But this is the hostile environment. I think someone has said this is the hostile environment on steroids, and it's going to be even more aggressive. So people are going to come here. People have already come to Britain thinking that they're going to be able to stay for a period of time, and then suddenly they're being booted out, particularly students. They finish their degree, and then they're being told to go. Now, I think within 18 months rather than 2 years. Yeah, it's just a few months, but nevertheless, it's that principle of grabbing what we can and then throwing the people out as soon as they've done what we want them to do. But we need them to be investing. We need them to be paying tax and to be supporting the older generation. But one of the areas where I think Starmer could perhaps approach this better is by reforming the Home Office and by reforming that whole principle of immigration and of bureaucracy, so that we don't have this huge backlog which is costing us so much money per day of people staying in hotels, applying for asylum or being rejected for asylum, and we're paying for them to stay there. Many other countries across Europe simply say, okay, here is a card, get work if you want it, and start contributing to the nation. Show how much you want to identify, want to integrate, and the English language thing should be part of that process. But again, I think the English language plan which Starmer is putting forward is as muddled as everything else. If he's proposing to extend IELTS to people's spouses, it's madness, because IELTS is a business and it's a very strange exam. I've been involved with it for about 20 years or so. I know how strange it is. And it's simply a money-making machine. We need a better system. We need a system not unlike the Israeli system, where people come into the country and then, as part of the process of settling into the country, they are given language classes, they're given opportunities to learn how to integrate. That is better than paying cheap hotels to accommodate people who are left in some sort of legal limbo because the Home Office is too lazy to do anything.
It's very interesting, Tim, isn't it? And we discussed with Phil this dilemma that Starmer is in, leading a centre-left party, but quite clearly trying to fend off rising support for a right-wing party. Clearly overtures in this speech that was made earlier this week to those more right-wing voters. Do you think that was a strategic mistake?
Absolutely, but it's not a mistake that Starmer is not alone in making that mistake. Kemi Badenoch has been making that mistake since she came into power. The idea that you can defeat Farage by trying to outdo Farage, all this is going to do. I mean, certainly it's true in the last few days, Farage has been muted. Farage has looked rather lost, and in a way, he doesn't really know how to respond to people using his copybook. But But he will respond, and he will respond by moving even further to the right. And that isn't good for the country. And you can't outflank Farage because he's got an entire plane of prejudice to conquer. So in the short term, Starmer steals Farage's thunder and seems to outmaneuver him. Farage is in some way his little boat, his little dinghy is unmoored. Farage is no longer unique, but you don't deal with the Farage prejudice by embracing the prejudice yourself. And so as this escalates, what this will do is escalate the rhetoric of the right. It will alienate the moderates. And certainly, if I were thinking, what will I vote? If I don't like Farage, I couldn't vote for the Conservatives because they're trying their crypto Farage. Now I can't vote for Labour. It leaves me with only one choice, which is the Lib Dems, and the Lib Dems are entertainingly keeping very quiet because if the Conservative Party were to fracture, which I think is a very strong possibility, some of them will go over to Reform, some of them will go over to the Lib Dems, and they could well find that the Lib Dems becomes His Majesty's loyal opposition, therefore with a much stronger opportunity to become the next government than Reform. And I think the British public are going to reject this move to the right because it's a false move. And these proposals by Starmer, what are they? He's got 4 to end the immigration salary thing, to make employers pay more in order to employ a foreigner, to reduce the graduate employment visa, and to set these spurious language requirements. And then, of course, the care sector. That's basically it. All of it is to gain headlines. It's not in itself going to achieve very much except to alienate the core Labour vote. It's a grave mistake.
So, Tim, finally, just let me ask you then, looking ahead, we've got some way to go until the next general election, but looking ahead, do you see a different scenario then? Is it likely that the Conservatives will fade away and the voters will be left with a choice between Labour, Lib Dems and Reform?
I think that's hugely possible. And I think the Lib Dems are playing this exactly as they should. I think the longer Kemi Badenoch remains in position, or indeed if she's replaced by Robert Jenrick, who is significantly more capable. I mean, he's one of those people in the House of Commons who could stand up and talk without notes, like Stephen Flynn, who does it brilliantly. But he is closer to Farage now than Kemi Badenoch. So unless someone like Cleverly were to take over the Conservative Party and move it back into the centre, the Conservative Party is facing extinction, and probably in a matter of years rather than in a matter of decades. Wow. It could happen incredibly fast.
Very interesting, and I know we'll come back to you again to follow things as they develop. Professor Tim Wilson, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Newshour. So, immigration remains one of the most complex and sensitive issues facing governments today. In the UK, the conversation is not just about policy, but about identity, values, and how change is communicated. As the debate unfolds, clarity and balance will be key. I'm Guy Shone, and from all of us here at A News, farewell for now.